The moment the glass of water slipped from her fingers and shattered across the marble floor, Elara Vance did not flinch, but the man she thought wasn't watching did. The richest woman in the building, known for her sharp decisions and even sharper silence, sat motionless in her leather chair, eyes closed, pretending to be asleep. Outside her office window, the bright daylight poured into the room, painting everything gold, but inside her, everything felt cold, distant, untouched. She had mastered the art of detachment. Or so she believed. But what happened next would break something she didn't even know still existed. Before we continue, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the unseen goodness in ordinary people, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Lifeline Tales. Your support keeps these stories alive. The headquarters of Vance Global stood tall in the center of the city, a symbol of power, ambition, and ruthless success. Employees walked fast, spoke less, and feared the name Elara Vance more than deadlines. She had built her empire from nothing after losing her parents young, turning grief into drive, loneliness into leadership. But in doing so, she had unknowingly built walls no one could cross. Every day, at exactly 2:15 p.m., she would sit in her office, close her eyes, and pretend to sleep. It was her quiet ritual, not for rest, but for observation. She believed people revealed their true nature when they thought no one was watching. Most days, she saw nothing worth remembering. Assistants scrolling through phones, managers whispering complaints, executives sneaking out early. Disappointment had become her expectation. But that day was different. Rohan Iqbal, the building's janitor, entered her office quietly as he did every afternoon. He was a man in his early 40s, with tired eyes but a gentle presence. His uniform was always clean, though worn at the edges. Few people knew his story, and fewer cared to ask. He pushed his cart slowly, careful not to make noise. He believed deeply in respecting spaces, even if the people inside never noticed him. As he began cleaning, the glass slipped from Elara's hand and shattered loudly across the floor. The sound echoed sharply. Anyone else would have jumped. But she stayed still, her breathing controlled, her act perfect. Rohan paused. He looked at her for a long moment, not suspiciously, but thoughtfully. Then, instead of calling for assistance or rushing nervously, he quietly set aside his tools and moved closer. What he did next wasn't part of his job description. He carefully removed his own worn scarf from around his neck and gently wrapped it around her hand, protecting her skin from the sharp glass fragments scattered near her fingers. His movements were slow, deliberate, filled with a kind of care that felt almost personal. He didn't know she was pretending. He simply believed she needed help. Then he knelt down and began picking up each shard of glass with his bare hands. Not rushing, not complaining. Just quietly ensuring that nothing would hurt her when she woke up. One small piece cut into his finger. A thin line of blood appeared, but he didn't react. He simply wiped it against his sleeve and continued. Elara felt it. Not the movement, not the sound, but something deeper. For years, people had approached her with intentions, greed, fear, ambition, but never with quiet, selfless care. She had forgotten what it looked like. And now, lying still in her chair, she felt something unfamiliar stir inside her chest. Rohan finished cleaning and gently placed a fresh glass of water on her desk. Then, almost instinctively, he adjusted the curtain slightly so the sunlight wouldn't fall directly on her face. It was a small gesture, but it carried a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. As he turned to leave, something unexpected happened. A small photograph slipped out from his pocket and fell to the floor. He didn't notice. Elara did. She waited until the door closed before opening her eyes slowly, her heart beating differently than before. She sat up and looked around the spotless room, but her attention was drawn immediately to the photo lying near her desk. She picked it up. It showed a young girl, no older than 8, smiling brightly despite the hospital bed she sat in. Tubes ran from her arms, and her face was pale, but her eyes were full of life. Beside her stood Rohan, smiling just as brightly, though his eyes carried a hidden exhaustion. On the back of the photo, in faded ink, were the words, "For Amina, Baba will always fight for you." Something inside Alara cracked. For the first time in years, her perfectly controlled world felt unstable. The next day, she didn't pretend to sleep. She waited. At exactly 2:15 p.m., Rohan entered again. But this time, as he stepped inside, he froze. Alara Vance was watching him. Not with her usual cold authority, but with something softer, something searching. He immediately lowered his gaze, nervous. People like him weren't meant to be noticed by people like her. But she spoke. Not loudly, not harshly, but gently. She asked about the photo. Rohan hesitated. Not because he didn't want to answer, but because he wasn't used to being asked. Then, slowly, he told her. Amina was his daughter. She had been battling a rare illness for 3 years. Treatments were expensive, unpredictable, and draining. He worked 2 jobs, janitor by day, security guard by night, but it was never enough. Still, he never stopped trying. Because to him, giving up wasn't an option. Alara listened. Truly listened. And as he spoke, she saw something she had lost long ago. Purpose beyond success. Love without condition. Strength without recognition. For the first time, her wealth felt small. Days passed, but something had changed. Alara began noticing things she had ignored before. The tired eyes of employees, the quiet struggles hidden behind professional smiles, the unseen lives beneath the surface of her empire. But most of all, she noticed Rohan. His kindness wasn't occasional, it was constant. Helping others without being asked, fixing things without being noticed, carrying burdens without complaint. And she realized something powerful. The strongest person in her building wasn't an executive. It was a janitor. One afternoon, she made a decision. Not as a CEO, but as a human being. She quietly arranged for Amina's full medical treatment at one of the best hospitals in the country. No publicity, no announcements, no credit. When Rohan received the news, he was overwhelmed. He didn't know who had made it happen, but he knew it was a miracle. But Alara didn't stop there. She created a foundation within her company, one that supported employees and their families during medical emergencies. She restructured policies, introduced compassion where there had only been pressure. Her empire didn't weaken. It transformed. And so did she. Because sometimes, it only takes one quiet act of kindness to wake someone from a lifetime of emotional sleep. Near the end, if this story touched your heart, don't just watch silently, like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps spread stories that remind the world of humanity. And before we close, here's a special request. Comment below with the word, kindness, if you believe small actions can change big lives. Alara Vance had spent years pretending not to see. But the day she pretended to sleep was the day she finally woke up.